Hi there, I'm Kayla, and welcome to my first video. Do I know what I'm doing? Absolutely not. Did it take me forever to do the lighting and to figure out the camera and the mic and all the things that you need to do to start a YouTube channel? Yes. Will this be a good quality video? I have no idea. Will we have fun learning about some Regency history and some seaside tourism and the background of Sanditon? Absolutely. So, originally, Regency Rumors was a podcast that I co host with my husband Jordan, where we recap shows like Bridgerton and other period dramas. If you'd like to recap Bridgerton with us, we have season 1 and 2 here on YouTube or on any of your favorite audio streaming services. Now, I'm looking at expanding into YouTube. So if you like what you watched today, please like and subscribe this video. If you hear any doors creaking or rain outside, it's because I myself happen to live in a seaside town in the UK, and it is pouring the rain outside, and the wind is gustling, swooshing. The wind is going insane here. So apologies, but these are the realities of living in a seaside town in a house that's probably from the 1840s, 1850s. So today this video focuses on the inspiration for Sanditon, Jane Austen's last but sadly unfinished novel. I love Sanditon because it's this unique setting. Normally, a lot of period dramas are set in country estates, English countrysides, cities like Bath or London. And so Sanditon kind of serves as almost a character in and of itself in the story. So I'm a heritage and tourism researcher, so a show like Sanditon is right down my alley. I love learning about the ways that tourism areas and heritage sites develop over time. I've researched historical guidebooks and travel writing accounts, looking at the ways that people have perceived tourism sites in the past, and looking at the ways that we can improve upon communicating heritage sites and tourism areas to audiences today. Apart from the romances that happen in Sanditon, I think just the setting alone is this very vibrant, interesting place that we all could see ourselves enjoying. The realities of these resort towns were a bit more grim than the show represents. Going to the beach for vacation and getting into the ocean was a lot less about relaxation like it is today, and much more about helping people with their health problems. When I say that people in the Regency era, and more broadly, Georgians, were obsessed with the sea, I mean that they were obsessed. Seawater was somehow a cure all for everything. Do you have a tummy ache? Just get in the sea. Do you have rashes? Get in the sea. Are you a hysterical young lady? Well, you better dip your toe into the sea and then you'll calm down. Are you limping? Just go right to the sea and somehow you will be miraculously cured. People were drinking copious amounts of seawater, thinking it was helping them internally.
Oh, in heaven's name. What's wrong with you? Find a remedy.
So where did this come from? Why were they obsessed with the sea? These kind of sea, water, and air theories were floating around from the 1600s onwards. There were a couple different doctors who talked about the benefits of the sea and that sea air would help with respiratory issues. And these theories ended up becoming full-blown movements, essentially. And by the 18th century, these small farming villages were rapidly turning into seaside resorts where people from all over the UK were coming to visit them in hopes that just being by the sea and ingesting it and breathing it in would somehow cure the many ailments that people had at the time. The truth was that there was a lot of air pollution at the time. Things like smoke from coal were affecting people's breathing. So some people's symptoms would be relieved for a period of time temporarily, and they would attribute that to going to the seaside. Seawater was seen as this powerful thing that if you mixed it with goat's milk or crab eyes, or that you soaked in it in high temperatures, that it would help a lot of the issues that you had. Because of the medicinal powers of the sea, tourists began flocking to these seaside towns in the Regency era, and one such tourist was Jane Austen, who visited a seaside resort town in 1805, where she stayed for a number of weeks with her family. And it's said that this stay inspired her last but unfinished novel, Sanditon. So, was Sanditon a real place? Well, it definitely seemed like Sanditon was based on a town called Worthing in Sussex in the south of England. So originally, Worthing was a small settlement with a few farms dotted about, but when prominent roads were established in the area, it made it easier for the fishing industry to grow and more inhabitants began moving into the town. This coincided with these seaside towns being seen as medically beneficial. People were being prescribed by their doctor to visit these seaside resorts. So entrepreneurs saw an opportunity to build up these areas and to make money in tourism. So a resort was being developed in Worthing at the time that Jane Austen was visiting by a man named Edward Ogle. Based on letters from Jane Austen to her sister Cassandra, we're led to believe that the sisters are friends with Mr. Ogle, or at least they're very familiar with him, and they've seen him out and about in Worthing. So in her letters, Jane Austen depicts Mr. Ogle as this cheerful, optimistic, hardworking, but perhaps chaotic entrepreneur who is obsessed with turning Worthing into kind of an oasis of the sea. So Jane Austen stayed in Worthing a lot longer than most of us would go on vacation to the beach. So she would have really gotten to know the place of Worthing, perhaps talked to Mr. Ogle about his vision for the seaside resort. Jane Austen describes Mr. Parker in Sanditon as this: Mr. Parker was perceived to be an enthusiast. On the subject of Sanditon, a complete enthusiast. The success of Sanditon as a small, fashionable bathing place was the object for which he seemed to live, and it had been a quiet village of no pretensions. But he saw the probability of its becoming a profitable speculation. He had engaged in it, and planned and built, and praised and puffed, and raised it to something of young renown. And Mr. Parker could now think of very little besides. He could talk of it forever. It was his mine, his lottery, his speculation, his hobby horse, his occupation, his hope, and his futurity. So this description of Tom Parker is very similar to Mr. Ogle's personality. Mr. Ogle is very passionate about Worthing. He is very optimistic about its future, and he seems to be someone who is very well connected. He's got a lot of fingers in different pies. So along with his brother James, he owned quite a prominent docking company in London and was well known within the industry. He also was helping develop a canal project for London. And then, of course, there was Worthing, which was almost his passion project. He started it when he was 40, and he was looking to turn Worthing into a seaside resort for the most fashionable middle and upper classes. In one of her letters, Jane writes about Mr. Ogle not having to pay for admittance to anything because he just knows everyone and they let him in for free. And that's very much a characteristic of a well-connected entrepreneur. He was also known as being kind of an upright and moral businessman. He was very much against slavery, but it seemed like he could be a bit heavy-handed with Worthing. He had a very picturesque vision of his seaside town. There was a story about him complaining about a local band playing in the area because it would ruin the kind of quiet solitude of Worthing, and it would ruin the atmosphere that he was trying to create. So as with many entrepreneurs, Mr. Ogle wasn't loved by everyone. He did have the nickname King Ogle to kind of suggest that he saw himself as a bit of a ruler over Worthing. But Jane Austen calls him Sweet Mr. Ogle, in one of her letters, and it definitely seems as if there's this familiarity there and that she definitely has enjoyed his company when she's been around him. In Andrew Davies' Sanditon, we get this sense that over time, Charlotte creates this type of connection with Tom Parker. She becomes very interested in Sanditon as a project in season 1, and she can really see Tom Parker's vision, and she comes to respect him and want to find ways of growing Sanditon and helping him make it into the seaside resort that he sees for the future. Tom Parker's home, Trafalgar House, is said to be based on Edward Ogle's home, Warwick House. He built it for his family, but also members of the royal family stayed at Warwick House, as well as other people in the aristocracy who would rent out his home in months of the summer so that they could partake in the waters of Worthing. George IV's daughter, Charlotte, stayed in Worthing in 1807. So Princess Charlotte's stay in Worthing was really important. It brought a lot of notoriety to the area. There were people celebrating in the streets and throwing flowers. There were theater productions that were praising her. And then there was buzz further afield that she had visited Worthing, and it kind of legitimized the area as a seaside town that all the great and the good should visit. So it's no surprise that in season 1, Tom Parker is so keen for his brother Sidney to bring his influential friends to Sanditon. It's important that the word get out that somewhere like Sanditon is the place to be because it helps with tourism and growth. So what was Worthing like? Well, when Jane Austen visited, she was 29 years old. She hadn't published any of her books yet, and Worthing was still primarily a fishing community. And she would have visited on the kind of cusp of it becoming a seaside resort. By 1810, there was a little bit more going on. There were auctions and raffles. There were libraries that people could visit. There were donkey races on the beach. There are accounts of Fanny Austen, Jane Austen's niece, going to buy breads and pastries, going to raffles, and her family partaking in the baths in Worthing. Jane Austen's sister Cassandra went to a bathhouse called Wick's Warm Baths. Wick's Warm Baths. Say that 5 times. Wick's Warm Baths. But it was one of the first in Worthing. When I was researching this, actually, it was funny because I was looking up Wick's baths in Worthing, trying to get a feel of the history of this bathhouse. And there is still a Wick's baths today. I don't know if they have any connection, but I think they're a company out of South England, so it'd be interesting if they're the same. But they make bathtubs today, and it was very hard to find any of the history. They still exist, and there are many baths that you can buy from them now if you would like to partake in your own bath. I don't know why I keep saying partake in the bath, but it feels like for whatever reason the only way to describe kind of getting in a bath in this time period or like getting in the sea in the Regency era is to partake in it. I don't know why that is, but I'm gonna say that now when I go to the beach with my dog. I'm just gonna be like, I'm partaking in the sea. So eventually a kind of guidebook was written about Worthing in 1803 by a man named John Feltham. He writes, "The erection of a very commodious warm bath sufficiently prove how far Worthing has risen in public estimation." Partake in the baths. Partake in the baths. Oh. How much money do you want to bet that this guy wrote partake in the baths somewhere in this guidebook? I should go and look. So these baths were seen as medically beneficial, which is why in Sanditon in season 1, Tom Parker brings in a doctor to show off what would essentially be a bathtub today. Bathing machines were also really popular, which are those funny looking box wagon things that horses would take into the sea, and women could change their clothing and have a bit of privacy, and then they could swim behind them in order to preserve their modesty. I think in all of Sanditon, These look like the most unfun and uncomfortable aspect of living in a Regency seaside town, and the poor horses having to stand that deep in the water and you not being able to just kind of swim and see all of the coastline. You're like having to hide behind the machine. There's so much about the Regency period that intrigues and interests me, but those bathing machines are not one of them. So apparently, these seaside towns made it hard for people to have a modicum of decency. Another writer in 1813 wrote about men getting distracted by women bathing. In a book called A Sketch of Worthing by John McCall, he suggests to the male gentlemen of Worthing to recollect the delicacy that is due to the female sex, and instead of lounging upon the beach and indulging in unpleasant observations, to direct their attention to amusements more manly and becoming. Oh. So now that Sanditon has finally had its last season, what would the future of a town like Sanditon be like in the Regency era? How did the town of Worthing fare? In Austen's lifetime, Worthing really did become the success that Edward Ogle had hoped that it would become as a seaside resort town. Edward Ogle built a prominent colonnade, a theater, libraries, a promenade because Regency people love a good promenade, commercial stables, a large hotel, and eventually in his large hotel, there were assembly rooms and ballrooms, which we know is essential to the Regency lifestyle. In terms of Austen's original work, we'll never know whether or not she intended for Sanditon to be a successful seaside town. In the case of Worthing, Sanditon's real-life counterpart, local riots, boating accidents, and economic troubles meant that Worthing died down as a prominent seaside town by the late 1800s. Despite seaside towns like Worthing having a lot of potential and money to be made in tourism, it was really hard to get these areas off the ground. Fires were common and could rampage these areas very quickly. There was the threat of the French docking on southern shores and attacking these coastal towns. A lot of these houses suffered from dampness and flooding. It was difficult to build roads to get proper communication to bigger towns, to bring in tradespeople and shopkeepers. This is still an issue in tourism today. Places like Worthing were seasonal, so it was hard to encourage people to invest long term in areas that were only going to be making good profits certain months of the year. So it was hard to attract long-term tradespeople or shopkeepers to want to bring businesses into a town that might only be making good money in the summers. In the early days, Worthing wasn't really seen as a prominent seaside town because there were no prominent roads, there were no police, no post office, no libraries, no churches, no proper draining systems. So there was a lot missing to attract tourists to a town like Worthing. So it was impressive that there was so much growth in a place like Worthing in the 1800s with all the things that it needed to become a success. And of course, it's not as if Worthing disappeared off the map. There's people who live there today and visit Worthing. And in 1894, another prominent writer visited Worthing. Oscar Wilde wrote the importance of being earnest while he stayed at the seaside town. So, based on the show, which is now popular in its own right, I'm going to predict that Sanditon had the future of a seaside town like Llandudno in North Wales. Llandudno is the largest resort town in Wales, but in terms of all of the UK, it's seen as kind of a mid-sized seaside town, and it has a lot of similarities to the humble beginnings of Sanditon. Llandudno started out with about 1,000 inhabitants. This was until architect Owen Williams had the idea to turn Llandudno into this prominent seaside town. So Llandudno's success was a little bit later than Sanditon's would have been. Llandudno began to grow in about the 1840s. And it became a popular area for Victorian visitors as it had a large pier, a nice promenade, an opulent theater, and a lot for upper and middle class people to do during the summer in Llandudno. What really brought success to these seaside towns after the Georgian era was the railway. By the 1870s, there were ads in newspapers talking about people taking picnic trips and excursion tours to seaside towns like Llandudno. One of my favorite parts of heritage tourism research is reading these old guidebooks because some of the language is so flowery and over the top. So another guidebook made me laugh. Its description of Llandudno is so superfluous. The sands, which are remarkably smooth and firm, stretch for a considerable distance by a declivity into the sea. The flow and ebb of the tide are so gradual that children and the most timid ladies may enjoy a refreshing plunge in the water without fear. By the Victorian era, places like Llandudno had a plethora of activities to do at these seaside resorts. So Llandudno had concerts, fireworks, talks, lectures, afternoon teas, steamboat rides, sailing adventures. There was a load of things to do during this period at a seaside town. Llandudno was a popular area for Welsh Eisteddfods, which were popular festivals with prestigious poetry and singing competitions, which are still enjoyed today. There were haberdashery shops, clothing shops, stationery stores, coffee rooms. People could still rent horse drawn bathing machines and pleasure boats. So it was clear that towns like Llandudno were growing not only as tourism areas, but as local communities. This is how I envision Sanditon's immediate future: a lively seaside town where people not only want to visit for a summer, to partake in the waters, to enjoy local entertainment, and to socialize, but also for people to invest their lives and to move there and to be a part of a local community. For a character like Charlotte, I see Sanditon becoming the kind of place that she would want to stay for a lifetime, to raise a family, to finally have a forever after. I'm so excited about this final season. Today, places like Worthing and Llandudno are still scenic, beautiful locations that people love to visit. Whilst I haven't visited Worthing, I have visited Llandudno quite a lot. Living in North Wales, Llandudno is the perfect place for a summer afternoon. My husband and I love visiting there and taking our dog Griffin to walk on the promenade, to read a nice book or have a picnic, to get a scoop of ice cream, to walk on the Victorian pier that's still there. While it's been interesting to do kind of a deep dive into seaside resort towns like Worthing or Llandudno, I'm really glad that Austen chose to set Sanditon in a developing seaside town so we could see what that was like and how that impacted the characters of her story. I just wish we could have known what the ending was. There's a lot to be learned from towns like Sanditon today. We've seen a big surge in staycationing, originally from isolation periods and then now from economic stress. So a lot of people are choosing to holiday nationally rather than abroad. The same could be said for people in the 1800s. The Napoleonic Wars really affected international travel at the time. So towns like Worthing became popular places for people to visit while they were staycationing in the UK during the Regency period. It's important to remember that towns like Worthing or Llandudno were not just about the people that visited there temporarily and stayed as tourists, but about the people who lived there and invested their time there and built communities there. It was the people like this who inspired Austen to write her final yet unfinished novel, Sanditon. Thanks for watching this video on the inspiration to Sanditon. I hope you enjoyed my first video. There's so much stuff about Regency seaside tourism that I think is super interesting, so I've decided to do a video just on tourism in the Regency era. So if you've liked this video, I'd love if you subscribe and follow along because I have some really fun video ideas in the future. And thank you! I have no idea what my intro is yet because this is my very first video. Goodbye! And now I'm going to go partake in the baths.